Hi, we have Oblorde Shigby, and welcome to The Relationship Edge, a podcast where we explore the power of relationships in the private markets. I'm here today with a great friend and mentor of mine, Taj Eldridge. Taj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation, Bloody.
Oh, same here, same here. And so maybe to dive right in, you've had a super interesting path into investing. Someone with a BA in poetry and literature, a degree in geopolitical economics. Put simply, how'd you get here?
Yeah, great question. I'll start with the idea of the degree in poetry and literature. When I was in school, music was a huge factor of mine. Even when people book time with me now, one of the questions I ask them on my Calendly is, "What's your favorite song?" And so for me, there's a correlation between music and venture. When you look at founders as artists and you look at VCs as venture funds and you look at accelerators as like your Spotify, your SoundCloud, it's all interrelated. But one of the things I learned from poetry and literature, even in getting my graduate degrees in economics, is that everything comes down to storytelling and telling a story. Stories tell, stories make people feel, they provide emotions. There's this idea that what people don't believe that stories impact our relationships, and they do. And so I think that that's been beneficial in my pathway of being a venture capitalist and everything I do around the climate space. And I began my career as a banker from Wells Fargo and UBS, and went in there from making investments and being a founder myself. And then I became an investor. And I think the reason for that pathway is important is because I think as an investor, it made me more empathetic to the founder journey because I was one myself and I understood that. And so that's why I always say for me, having that founder background, but having the quantitative background, but also having the storytelling background, all wrapped into one, allowed me to be an investor and really kind of be more a proponent for both founders as well as my own LPs.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And both the analogy around founders as artists and the power of storytelling across all these domains, I think are, themes that I've heard in bits and pieces before, but I think you've wound together in a way I haven't quite heard in the past, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and across that career journey you've described, right? You, especially today, or maybe the past few jobs you've had, first at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and now as GP at Include Ventures, you're someone who's clearly spent your career curating your community of relationships. I'd love to hear what your single biggest win or opportunity that's come your way as an investor that you can attribute back to the relationships you have.
Absolutely. I spent the last decade plus into climate space, and you mentioned one of the organizations I represented and worked for was LACY, the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, which is the incubator for the city of Los Angeles. And in that experience, what I've learned was that in the early days, this is pre-pandemic, I used to say when clean tech was a dirty word. There was not a lot of people who look like a lot of us on this podcast, some of the folks listening to it, that were in the positions for being both founders as well as investors. It was very, very under a market to where a lot of people that are in the climate space, it was very homogeneous, for lack of a better word. And so, but I knew there were a lot of people making solutions in this space, both black and brown. And so we ended up founding this organization called Green Tech Noir right at the top of the pandemic to collect a lot of these individuals there. And I think we started out as Slack. We started out as a simple community, no intentions, but just to get people together to be a convening. But what happened became so much more. Been so much relationships, so many opportunities for me as an investor to invest in some of those companies, both in what I do would include, as well as the project I lead with an organization called Jobs for the Future, or GFF, in collaboration with Aries Capital Foundation. And so both of those opportunities, both that include and JFF, allow me to utilize a network of both Green Tech Noir, Latinx and sustainability, ground in the green space, to collect relationships with founders, other funders, and just other individuals. I would say, though, too, it's been important for me, not just as an investor to invest in these companies, but to find talent, to place at other companies as well. One of the things we've said often is that in the past, we've seen startup companies become more than just startups. They were marketing agencies, influential agencies. And I think today you're going to see a lot of companies as talent agencies where they're developing a product, but they're also developing these leaderships that are leading that product, who in turn will create their own product. It's like almost like a return to the PayPal Mafia days, but you'll see a lot of different companies become ex Mafia or whatever the name may be, because they're having those talented individuals that led product at their firm and they're branching out on their own.
No, it makes total sense to me. And I definitely have already seen here in like the Chicago ecosystem, for example, what it looks like to have one success spawn a set of leaders or a set of people who've been a part of that prior success that they can go off and like leverage the relationships they built, the reputation that they've gained, the expertise that they have to go build the next thing for sure. Actually, be curious if you have like a particular example of maybe like a deal or like a introduction that you saw happen that translated into some pretty meaningful success.
Yeah, definitely. And there's two, I think, two great stories, and both of them I attribute to not only the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, but include ventures and further jobs for the future. One is a clean tech company founded in Los Angeles by the name of Charger Help. Charter Help was founded by a young lady by the name of Camille Terry. And the reason why I think relationships were good, were important in that build was that um, before Green Tech Noir, before all that, we met at an accelerator in person during the days that we were all in person back together. As she was very building her company, and that relationship we met, we carried on throughout the life of the company. And that was probably about 4 years ago. And throughout the relationship, three of the organizations I was affiliated with invested in this particular company, both at the LACI or Lacey standpoint, includes standpoint, and also JFF standpoint. But also, too, that company allowed the community around me and her merge to where a lot of my networks ended up helping her and ended up investing in her just because of the conversation we had. Another example that I think is really interesting is another company called Spark Charge, based in Buffalo. And the reason why I think that's important is I'm here in the West Coast. Spark Charge is in the East Coast, of course, but that relationship occurred because of technology and occurred because of this life that we were living in a post-pandemic world of utilizing technology to connect, just like we're doing right now with you in Chicago and me in Los Angeles. And so I think those are really two great examples about how networks matter, but also how technology can help those relationships extend and grow and mature, and then how as investors or even people in the business can benefit from that maturity.
No, absolutely. Maybe speaking of technology, although that's one piece of the puzzle in my mind, I certainly see you as someone who's like prolific, who has not only like lots of content and the like that you're sharing, but also lots of relationships that you're maintaining. I'd love
Yeah.
to hear how you operationalize that. Like, are there practices and habits that you regularly perform, frameworks that you take, tools that make things easier?
Yeah, you're asking for the secret sauce, so definitely. One of the things I always learned for me is that take less and give more, and for me that also means information. And so a lot of times when I see people on, let's use platforms such as LinkedIn, sharing information, it's typically about themselves, about their achievements. And my thing is that's fine and good, but let me share things about people in my network's achievements. Let me highlight those individuals as well and kind of create this sense of this truly sense of global community. And one would say, well, how do you do that? For me, I love technology. I love simplifying a lot of things. So as an example, using Google Alerts to find out companies or founders I'm interested in, then using a technology like IFTTT, if this then that, that takes those articles, particularly after I read them, and they repost them on my social media, then tying my LinkedIn social media to my Twitter or X now, as it's called, and others. And so that's just a perfect example of how I've used technology to not only share information that I think is important about my relationships and my network, but also do it in a way to where I can still have my day to day work and I'm not behind a desk and just tweeting and posting and everything else. The other thing I would say too for me is that as an investor, as a person in this space, you want to consume as much information as possible. And that's why I love the fact that a lot of our content that we see, they make it audio. Because for me, I can listen more while I'm reading something else, being able to multitask, but primarily listen to a lot of things, including these glasses that are speakers that I have on as well, and mics. But I think that for me, that's been the greatest part of not only brand building, but relationship building is showing people that, yes, I'm paying attention to you. I'm paying attention to you because I'm sharing information about you. And I don't have any direct benefit, immediate direct benefit. But the benefit that we're getting in this relationship is I'm depositing into that relationship instead of just simply withdrawing. A lot of people do that often where they withdraw from their relationship. They ask and ask instead of depositing or giving. And I think that that's been one of the things that have made a lot of relationships that I've had last longer, been more effective because people see that that relationship is not just extractive, but it's additive.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a part of the Techstars network, and the Give First mantra is definitely something that is expressed throughout the entirety of that network, and I think you certainly personify a lot of it. I'd be curious if you pick like specific subsets of the network that you choose to perhaps like nurture or deposit more into in that way, or if it ends
Yep.
up being a bit more organic based off of what you're coming across.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a little bit more structured. Of course, as I mentioned before, as a co-founder, co-founding advisor of Green Tech Noir, as a benefit for those being in that community, I definitely ensure that I'm looking at information for individuals there and share that first. And plus, is in my area of expertise of climate. I think if I was a generalist, it'll be a little bit more difficult because there's a wider swath of things that you would have to manage and take care of. But because the area that I'm in is very specific, and there's a lot of pieces within climate as well, climate investing and clean tech. There's a lot of pieces within it. But when we're talking about the type of individuals that I want to highlight, people of color, people from underrepresented communities, I think it's a little bit more easier to manage. But yeah, I'll start first with individuals that are in green tech noir, individuals that are in Latinx and sustainability and brown in the green space to share their information and their wins and a lot of the articles about that. And then also too, one of the things I realized is that social media is less about the me in it, but it's about the we. And so, in addition to sharing information from the people in those networks, I realize that some people in those same networks that are in that's in the climate space, they might be open or they want to hear about other things that are happening that they may have missed. So I end up becoming this little bit of a news center for my network as well. So again, for me, what that means is that I'm giving my network something as opposed to extracting, as opposed to having them share things about me. And then what I see often is that when that occurs, when you do that, you don't have to ask people to share information about you. You don't have to ask people to share your articles because they'll see it, they'll share it for you, and they become your cheerleaders, which makes it a little bit more authentic, I believe. And so that's one of the ways that I've looked at that and my theory about relationship building and relationship management. Because I think a lot of times, too, people concentrate so much on the building of relationship, they fail to concentrate on the nurturing and the management of those relationships as well.
Absolutely. Um, One other interesting angle that I think most of our listeners would be pretty interested in hearing about is you at Include Ventures not only invest in companies, but you also work really closely with other emerging managers, like through the accelerator program that you have, and then over time directly through the fund itself. I'd love to hear if you've seen any interesting best practices from managers that you work with, from a relationship management, relationship nurturing side, that you think are particularly good or compelling.
Absolutely. And first, let me say, Include Ventures is a fund to fund first. So the first piece of the business is about fund to fund management. And yes, we have a sister organization, VC Include, that creates these cohorts. Think of it like an accelerator for fund managers or fund ones that go through that and went on a third cohort. And then there's a direct investment side where we co-invest with our fund managers with a direct investment vehicle. I think for the fund managers, what I love and what I've seen is that when you're a founder, sometimes founders go through these acceleration programs and you build this bit of a cohort. You become a fraternity or a sorority even of founders because you're going through the same things and same of the issues. A lot of times with the fund managers, you don't get that because it's kind of you're spending half your time fundraising, so you don't really have time to build these true relationships outside of those you feel like they can be capital to you. But what I've seen a lot more within the cohorts, the first three cohorts of VC included, and then subsequently from the funds that we invest in, is that they've built that idea of that non-extractive relationship where they're sharing information and realizing that they're not necessarily competitors because they're focusing on different things, but they're collaborators to ensure that the market kind of lift up. And it's that whole idea that we've heard so many times that a rising tide lift boats. I think phrases like that are often said, but I think with fund managers and the ones we've worked at, we've seen it come into actual real life, where they're realizing that that can be something that can happen. One of the examples that I would give from that I've seen on the fund manager side is that we had a cohort that was interested in creating a special purpose vehicle to invest in their own funds. So it was, I think, about 10 of them in this cohort. And what they were talking about was that, well, we're all fundraising at the same time. Why don't we put some of our own money aside, put into a special purpose vehicle to invest in all of us together and kind of show some other folks as well. And through those conversations, there were different organizations that were interested in matching that because they saw that collaborative spirit because everybody had this issue that they were facing that they wanted to solve together. So I think that's been something that's really interesting that we've seen also. One other thing I've been seeing on the fund manager side is that I think the mistake that fund managers make, similar to founders, is that I used to talk to founders and they were like, if I get this capital, if I get an investment, everything's done. And I would ask them, well, what happens after you get the investment, right? Like there's a reality once you get it, then the other parts of really managing that has been key. And I think the fund managers have seen that, and some of the ones that we've seen, and we provided funding for them for about a year ago, is that, in addition to raising money as a fund manager, you have all these other expenses that you need to take care of, legal expenses, marketing expenses, what have you. And one of the things that we did was provide grants to 10 climate funds that was non-recoverable that went into the GP that allowed them to have a little bit more of a breathing room and freedom to either pay some of those legal bills or either pay some analysis to ensure that their process and their thesis was airtight. But it just kind of reduced a lot of that pressure. And so I think what we're seeing now, more so for the fund managers, is that you need to find partners and network and find partners that are interested in providing more than just LP capital because we need it, yes, but some of this other types of alternative capital from a GP standpoint or others can be extremely beneficial and really make you kind of have that leap a little bit further.
Now, it's incredibly useful information. And I think for so many fund managers who we talk to at 4 Degrees, it's a common conversation we have is yes, it's important to maintain relationships with founders and others in the ecosystem, but it's even more important in some ways to maintain the relationship with the LP. And yet it feels like most people are focused on that initial, how do I close the fund
Yeah.
versus the ongoing relationship management over the long run.
Yeah. And further, I would say that there's a relationship that people have to, we began this conversation about storytelling. The reason why that's important is because often people are going to tell your story. The way that you control is ensure you have those great relationships because they can either tell a story that's false about what you're doing, they can tell a misinformed story because they've heard so many different versions of it, or they can tell the right story at the right time and what you need it. And I think that's, again, going back to the whole idea of maintaining those relationships, giving first, and really being crystal clear on what you're providing. So that way it's no confusion. It's just a really great opportunity to tell the story of you as a person and a fund manager.
Yeah, no, definitely a takeaway for me from this episode so far is just the power of storytelling and how not only does that wind through your ability to raise capital and to have these sorts of conversations, but how that tied to giving first and building on that relationship over time allows your story to be in rooms that you're not in. And I can see how that translates into plenty of benefits for people in all sorts of different careers. Um,
Absolutely.
I'd love to actually, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go for it.
No, go ahead, please.
Mm. Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'd love to maybe wrap with a final question for you, which is I'd love to hear what you think the single biggest lesson that you've learned about relationship management is, whether it's in the private markets or otherwise, that you think most people just get wrong.
Having great tools, which is so apropos given this podcast and given 4 Degrees.
Hmm.
For me, when we talk about relationships, and I would say this, is that it's more than just about knowing a person's name, knowing where they work. It's about actually knowing them. And I think that's one of the things I've been excited about your product and some others is that you get to have this well-rounded view of this person more than just a job and a title. And I believe that really kind of shrinks the world down. When we would have conversations, whether those are with other funders who are looking to fund us, other partners, other VCs, other investments that we want to make, one of the things I always try to do is ensure what was the common ground, what were the commonalities. As an example, if I may, when you and I met, we talked about this link to Texas because I recognized the phone number, the cell number that you had. And so I think that for me, it's all about taking in this information and really, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about tools to use, but really humans, we are one of the greatest computers ever made, right? And so part of that really is really understanding and listening. And I think a lot of times too, we fail to do that because we're so mirror focused on what we need to get out of the relationship, again, that distractionism. But if we take a step back and think more additive, we'll see those connections there. And I think those connections will allow for a stronger long-term bond and allow us to use technology more effectively for ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful lesson. Naturally a huge proponent of technology, but even outside of technology, I agree that there's human intelligence that really drives so much of what we're able to do from a relationship standpoint with people. Josh,
Absolutely.
this has been incredible. Thank you so much for being willing to take the time with us. I guess first, where can people find you?
Absolutely. Well, definitely if you're using the 4 Degrees app, you'll be able to find me because if you email me, you'll see it. But LinkedIn, definitely find me on my full name, Taj Eldridge. On social media platforms, Econo Ahmad. Just think economics and Ahmad kind of mixed together, Econo Ahmad. But definitely, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate it. And I think just at the end, what love for people to think about is that we have these tools that are beneficial for us for a reason to help find and nurture these relationships, and we just had to make sure we're putting in what we want so we can get out what we want as well.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Josh.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a good one.